How thieves were punished in ancient Persia, in the vast empire that stretched from India to Greece, where kings claimed divine authority and ruled over millions with absolute power. There existed a system of justice so elaborate, so psychologically sophisticated, and so utterly merciless that it transformed the simple crime of theft into a nightmare that could last for generations. This is the story of how ancient Persia dealt with thieves, not through quick executions or simple imprisonments, but through punishments so intricate and so perfectly designed to destroy both body and soul that they became legendary throughout the ancient world for their creative cruelty. Today, we explore the Persian Empire's approach to theft, where stealing a loaf of bread could result in punishments that would make modern torture chambers seem merciful, and where the concept of justice was inseparable from the art of prolonged suffering. Our journey begins in the court of Cyrus the Great around 550 BC in the newly established Persian Empire. Cyrus had conquered the Babylonians, absorbed their legal traditions, and was in the process of creating a unified system of justice that would govern the largest empire the world had ever seen. But Persian justice was not simply about maintaining order or deterring crime. It was about demonstrating the absolute power of the King of Kings, whose authority was believed to flow directly from Ahura Mazda, the supreme deity of the Zoroastrian religion that dominated Persian culture. In Persian religious and legal philosophy, theft was not merely taking someone's property. It was an attack on the divine order that determined who should possess what. Every object in the empire, from the humblest clay pot to the greatest treasure, existed in its proper place according to divine will. Theft disrupted this cosmic harmony and required punishment that would restore balance to both the earthly and spiritual realms. The Persian approach to punishing thieves was based on a principle they called proportional escalation, the idea that punishment should not only fit the crime, but should exceed it in ways that would prevent any rational person from considering theft worthwhile. For the theft of small items, food, simple tools, or minor household goods, Persian law prescribed what they called replacement multiplication. The thief would be required to replace the stolen item with 10 identical objects. But here's where Persian ingenuity revealed itself. The thief had to create these replacement items personally, using only their own hands and basic tools. Picture this. A hungry peasant steals a loaf of bread. Under Persian law, he must now bake 10 loaves of identical bread and deliver them to his victim. But he cannot simply buy grain and use existing ovens. He must grow the wheat himself, harvest it by hand, grind it with stones, and build his own oven from clay he has dug and shaped personally. This process typically took 6 months to a year, during which the thief lived under constant supervision, worked without payment, and endured public humiliation as everyone in the community knew exactly what he was doing and why. The psychological impact was devastating. Months of grueling labor served as a constant reminder of the moment of weakness that had led to the crime. But the Persian system recognized that some people might be willing to endure this punishment, so they added additional elements designed to make the experience even more psychologically damaging. The thief's family was required to participate in the punishment, helping with the labor while publicly acknowledging their shame at being related to a criminal. Children of thieves were marked with temporary tattoos that identified their parents' crime, ensuring that they faced social ostracism during the entire punishment period. Spouses were required to wear special clothing that announced their connection to a thief. The entire family became a walking advertisement for the consequences of theft. For more serious thefts, valuable objects, livestock, or items with religious significance, Persian law prescribed punishments that combined physical mutilation with psychological torture in ways that would haunt the criminal for the rest of their life. The most common punishment for significant theft was progressive amputation, a process where the thief's body parts were removed one by one over an extended period, with each amputation corresponding to a specific aspect of their crime. The process began with the removal of the fingertip from the hand used to steal. This was done with surgical precision by court physicians, ensuring that the thief survived and remained conscious throughout the procedure. The severed fingertip was then placed in a special jar and displayed publicly as a warning to potential criminals. But this was only the beginning. Every month thereafter, another small piece of the thief's body would be removed, another fingertip, a toe, an earlobe, a piece of nose. The progression was carefully planned to ensure that the thief remained alive and functional for as long as possible, while gradually losing their physical integrity. The psychological impact of progressive amputation was calculated to be even more devastating than the physical pain. The thief lived each day knowing that they would lose another piece of their body at the end of the month. They could see their future mapped out in mutilation, with no hope of escape or reprieve. The removed body parts were preserved using Persian embalming techniques and displayed in special cases at the site where the theft had occurred. Passersby could see the physical progression of the thief's punishment, creating a graphic warning about the consequences of crime. But perhaps the most psychologically sophisticated aspect of progressive amputation was the way it affected the thief's relationships with family and community. People began to avoid the condemned person, not out of cruelty, but because witnessing the gradual destruction of someone they knew was psychologically unbearable. The thief became increasingly isolated as their punishment progressed, losing not only their physical integrity, but also their social connections and emotional support systems. By the time the punishment reached its final stages, many thieves had been completely abandoned by everyone they had ever known. For the most serious category of theft, stealing from temples, royal property, or items belonging to the dead, Persian law prescribed punishments so extreme that they were reserved for a special class of criminals called cosmic thieves, whose crimes were believed to threaten the stability of the universe itself. The punishment for cosmic theft was known as eternal reflection, a procedure designed to force the thief to confront their crime continuously for the rest of their life. The thief would be surgically blinded, but not in the conventional way. Persian court physicians had developed a technique for removing the eyes while leaving the optic nerves intact, creating a condition where the victim experienced constant visual hallucinations. These hallucinations were not random. They were carefully induced through a combination of drugs, psychological conditioning, and surgical alteration of brain tissue. The thief would see, continuously and inescapably, images related to their crime. The moment of theft played over and over, the face of their victim, expressing betrayal and pain, their own hands reaching for the stolen object. The hallucinations were designed to be as vivid and disturbing as possible, creating a mental prison from which there was no escape. The thief could not sleep without seeing their crime, could not eat without being reminded of their guilt, could not interact with others without being overwhelmed by visions of their wrongdoing. But eternal reflection included another element that revealed the true sophistication of Persian psychological warfare. The hallucinations were programmed to evolve over time, becoming more elaborate and disturbing as the years passed. What began as simple repetitive images gradually developed into complex narratives where the thief's crime had cosmic consequences, destroying entire civilizations, angering the gods, or unraveling the fabric of reality itself. Persian court records describe cosmic thieves who lived for decades under eternal reflection, gradually losing their ability to distinguish between their hallucinations and reality. Many developed elaborate delusions where they believed they were personally responsible for natural disasters, plagues, or military defeats that occurred years after their original crime. The social treatment of cosmic thieves was equally sophisticated in its cruelty. They were not imprisoned or exiled, but were allowed to live within their communities while bearing special marks that identified their status. Community members were required to treat them with exaggerated respect and deference, addressing them with titles like Great Destroyer or Cosmic Unraveler. This forced respect was designed to be psychologically torturous for both the thief and the community. The thief knew that the respect was mockery, while community members were forced to participate in a daily reminder of what could happen to anyone who committed serious crimes against the cosmic order. Persian punishment philosophy also recognized that different types of people required different approaches to justice. The empire's diverse population included merchants, farmers, soldiers, priests, and nobles, each with different values and fears that could be exploited for maximum psychological impact. For merchants who committed theft, Persian law prescribed punishments that attacked their professional identity and reputation. They would be forced to conduct business while wearing special clothing that advertised their criminal status, with signs and symbols that made it impossible for customers to forget that they were dealing with a convicted thief. But the punishment went beyond simple public humiliation. Merchant thieves were required to give their customers detailed descriptions of their crimes before conducting any business transaction. They had to explain exactly what they had stolen, from whom, and how, transforming every commercial interaction into a confession and apology session. The psychological impact on merchant thieves was devastating. Their professional lives became daily reenactments of their shame, and their economic survival depended on constantly reminding people of their worst moment. Many merchant thieves eventually abandoned their trades entirely, but Persian law followed them into new occupations, requiring them to maintain their criminal identification regardless of their current activities. For soldiers who committed theft, Persian military justice developed punishments that attacked their sense of honor and brotherhood. Military thieves were not executed or expelled from service. Instead, they were kept within their units while being subjected to elaborate rituals of humiliation designed by their former comrades. These rituals, known as warrior shaming, required the thief's fellow soldiers to participate in daily ceremonies where they would publicly list the ways in which the criminal had betrayed military values. The thief was forced to stand at attention while his comrades detailed his failures, his cowardice, and his unworthiness to wear the uniform. But warrior shaming included elements designed to maximize psychological damage to both the criminal and his fellow soldiers. The thief's former friends were required to invent increasingly creative insults and humiliations, forcing them to become active participants in psychological torture that gradually corrupted their own sense of military honor. Over time, entire military units involved in warrior shaming would develop psychological problems as the constant focus on betrayal and punishment poisoned their relationships and their professional effectiveness. Persian military commanders understood this effect and used it deliberately, believing that units that had experienced warrior shaming would be more loyal and disciplined due to their shared trauma. For religious thieves, those who stole from temples or religious ceremonies, Persian Zoroastrian authorities developed punishments that combined physical torture with spiritual contamination in ways that were believed to affect the criminal's soul permanently. Religious thieves underwent a procedure called sacred inversion, where they were forced to participate in elaborate ceremonies designed to reverse their spiritual relationship with the divine. Instead of receiving blessings, they would be subjected to formal curses. Instead of being purifying by sacred rituals, they would be deliberately contaminated by contact with spiritually polluted substances. The process of sacred inversion lasted for months and involved every aspect of Zoroastrian religious practice. The thief would be required to recite prayers backwards, participate in ceremonies where sacred objects were deliberately defiled, and undergo rituals where they formally renounced their connection to Ahura Mazda and accepted the influence of Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit of Zoroastrian theology. But sacred inversion was not simply a one-time ceremony. It was a permanent alteration of the criminal's spiritual status that affected their treatment by society for the rest of their life. Religious thieves were considered spiritually contagious, capable of spreading cosmic contamination to anyone they came into contact with. Communities developed elaborate protocols for interacting with religiously inverted criminals, including purification rituals that had to be performed after any contact, special clothing that provided spiritual protection, and ceremonial procedures for conducting necessary business with contaminated individuals. The Persian Empire's approach to theft also included provisions for dealing with organized crime and repeat offenders. Criminal organizations were treated not as collections of individual criminals, but as corrupted communities that required collective punishment and purification. When a group of thieves was discovered operating together, Persian law prescribed community dissolution, a process where every member of the criminal organization, along with their families and anyone who had knowingly benefited from their crimes would be subjected to coordinated punishments designed to destroy all social bonds between them. Community dissolution began with the physical separation of all group members who would be scattered across different regions of the empire. But separation was only the beginning. Each member would be subjected to individual punishments specifically designed to make them hate and fear their former associates. Through a combination of torture, psychological manipulation, and false information, Persian authorities would convince each group member that their former partners had betrayed them, stolen from them, or planned to harm them. This created lasting paranoia and hatred that ensured the criminal organization could never reform, even if its members eventually encountered each other again. The sophistication of Persian anti-theft measures extended to prevention as well as punishment. The empire developed elaborate systems of surveillance and social control designed to identify potential thieves before they committed crimes and to create community structures that made theft psychologically and practically difficult. Persian communities were organized into groups called trust circles, where every member was responsible for monitoring the behavior and financial status of every other member. Any unexplained wealth, unusual purchases, or suspicious behavior had to be reported to local authorities within 3 days of observation. But trust circles were not simply surveillance systems, they were psychological control mechanisms designed to make privacy impossible and to ensure that every person's life was completely transparent to their neighbors. The knowledge that any unusual behavior would be immediately noticed and reported created a level of social pressure that made spontaneous criminal behavior extremely difficult. Trust circles also included provisions for collective punishment when crimes occurred within their boundaries. If someone in a trust circle committed theft and was not immediately reported by other members, the entire circle would face reduced penalties but would still be subjected to public humiliation and economic sanctions. This system created powerful incentives for community members to monitor each other closely and to intervene before criminal behavior could develop into actual crimes. Many potential thieves were identified and subjected to preventive counseling, community service, or other interventions designed to address the underlying causes of their criminal impulses. As we examine the Persian approach to punishing thieves, we're confronted with a system that was simultaneously sophisticated and barbaric, psychologically astute and morally horrifying. The Persians understood human psychology well enough to design punishments that attacked not just the body, but the mind, the spirit, and the social connections that make life meaningful. Their methods were effective in deterring crime. Theft rates in the Persian Empire were remarkably low compared to other ancient civilizations. But this effectiveness came at a cost that modern sensibilities find appalling: the systematic destruction of human dignity and the transformation of justice into an art form of prolonged suffering. The Persian system reveals how fine the line can be between justice and cruelty, between maintaining social order and satisfying the human appetite for revenge. Their elaborate punishments served multiple purposes: deterring crime, demonstrating state power, satisfying victims' desire for justice, and providing entertainment for the general population. But perhaps most disturbingly, the Persian approach to punishing thieves shows how easily sophisticated legal and religious philosophies can be used to justify systematic cruelty. The elaborate theological and philosophical justifications for these punishments allowed Persian society to maintain its sense of moral righteousness while participating in practices that were objectively torturous. The legacy of Persian justice influenced legal systems throughout the ancient world and established precedents that persisted for centuries. Many of the psychological techniques developed for punishing thieves in ancient Persia can be recognized in modified forms in legal systems that existed well into the modern era. As we reflect on these ancient methods of dealing with theft, we're reminded both of how far human civilization has progressed in developing humane approaches to criminal justice and of how recently these improvements have occurred. The sophisticated cruelty of Persian anti-theft measures demonstrates that the capacity for systematic torture exists within human societies and can be justified by the most elaborate moral and religious reasoning. The echoes of ancient Persian punishment chambers remind us that the difference between justice and vengeance often lies not in the righteousness of the cause, but in the willingness to recognize the humanity of those who have transgressed against social order.